I will start the recording. Oh, and it's all edited on the back end, and so from time to time I'll do this too. I'll start asking a question and get lost, and I'll say, "Hold on, I'm going to start again." And so you're welcome to do that as well if you think of something you want to say a little differently, and you can say, "Just I'm going to start over."
Perfect.
All
That sounds
right.
great. That was good to know.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll have just done your intro, and I'll just pause for a second, and then we'll just get started.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much, Major Michelle Curran, for being on the show with me today. I'm so happy to have you here.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. I know we've done some scheduled juggling to make it happen, so I'm excited to actually talk to you today.
Yeah, you're flying in Air Force. You're flying in the Air Force as a pilot. It's like no big deal. I got to reschedule. So totally understand.
Awesome. Thanks.
So, you are currently the lead solo pilot, as I mentioned in the intro, for U.S. Air Force Air Demonstration Squadron. And I wanted to talk to you because there are still not a lot of women who do what you do. And certainly, I think within the Air Force, there have been great strides that have been made over the years, and with women being allowed to fly combat at this point, now for a couple decades,
Yep, since
2, 3.
1993.
Okay, yeah, so
Yeah.
it's almost 3 decades. But really interested in hearing about your path to getting to where you are now, and going way back and looking at your childhood and your upbringing and how it kind of shaped you into who you are. So let's go way back and talk about where you grew up, how you grew up, and what that was like. What was life like?
Yeah, we're gonna dig way back in the past. I grew up in a pretty small town, 4,000 people in north central Wisconsin, with not a lot of larger cities anywhere near it. So definitely grew up in the country. My grandparents were our neighbors. Our next closest neighbors were probably a quarter mile away. We were, out in the woods building tree forts and building rafts that we would put out on our pond. And I was outside all the time. So I think that started to foster my sense of adventure that kind of vectored me later on in my career, and was a big driving factor there. But I did not grow up in a military family, and I did not grow up in an aviation family. So I had 0 flight time when I went after getting a pilot slot and started my initial training with the Air Force.
And did you find that among your peers that was unusual?
Definitely. And I still have people that are surprised by that to this day. When I interview with people all the time, they're shocked that I came in with no experience. I think I got lucky that I enjoyed it as much as I did, and that I
Mhm.
kind of naturally was fairly good at it, but there was a lot of hard work, obviously, that went in behind that. It was an uphill, steep learning curve at the beginning, for sure. And I
Mhm.
definitely felt a little bit behind my peers who already had some experience just with how an aircraft handles and the radio calls and the aerodynamics and the mechanical side of how the jet works. I came in there not knowing any of that. So I was swimming upstream for sure.
And so you grew up in this kind of rural area. Tell me a little bit about when you went off to schooling, and then the subsequent training. What was that path like, and what was some of your experiences and challenges in doing that?
Yeah, so I was probably early high school and started to talk with my parents about what I was going to do after high school. And I knew I wanted to leave my small town. It was a great place to grow up, but I didn't want to stay there like a lot of high school kids.
Yeah.
And my dad had gone to college and seen other students doing ROTC. And he was like, I think is something you'd be good at. And it would give you the opportunity to travel all over the world. It would give you the potential to get a college scholarship. So
Mhm.
lots of benefits. So at first I actually was resistant. I was like, I don't want to be in the military. I want to be a normal college kid. I had this idea in my head that I couldn't do both, which ended up being completely wrong. So in the end, he talked me into it. I applied for a scholarship, and I've always been pretty driven as a child as well. So I was a good student, and I applied and got a 4-year scholarship. So I was happy about that. My parents were probably more happy about that. Um, and then from there, I went on to Air Force ROTC over in St. Paul, Minnesota. And
Mhm.
I was still not sure I wanted to fly airplanes. I picked the Air Force as far as branches of the military because I thought that was something I would want to do, and that gave me the most opportunity to do it, but I wasn't 100% sure. And I actually was a criminal justice major, and I
Uh-huh.
was like, oh, I want to be an FBI agent, or maybe I want to be a fighter pilot, and I would go back and forth, and I didn't know. So I actually didn't decide until I went to a base as a cadet and saw and heard the jets flying,
Uh-huh.
and I was I just still remember that. You can feel them in your chest. You can, like, they vibrate your whole body. And I was like, this is awesome. This is
I
exciting.
I'm sure that was a really powerful experience.
So that was kind of the hook where I was like, all right, this is the goal I'm going to go after. And then that was it. I set my sights on it and I kind of just chased it down one step at a time from there, all the way into pilot training and then competing to get a fighter, which is hard to do. We got 2 in my class of 25, and luckily I
Wow.
was second. So the guy that I got first went off and flew Strike Eagles, which are F-15Es, and then I had F-16s as my first choice, and I was able to get that out of pilot training.
What were some of the things that were said to you at these various points in which you had decided to enter the Air Force and then decided to go into the pilot training and be a fighter pilot? I mean, what were some of the things that people said to you that maybe if you weren't so driven and weren't so goal focused, that would have maybe deterred you?
I think people were pretty aware that they couldn't just be like, women don't do that. So I didn't get those kind of comments, but you definitely have the people that you could tell when you told them that's what you were going to do, that they would look at you a certain way and they're like, sure you are. Uh,
Wow.
so that can definitely be a deterrent. And I remember specifically my parents, I think it's more prevalent in older generations. And I had gotten an F-16 on my assignment night, which is a night I'll never forget when I found that out, because I've been working for, I mean, really since I was in college. So probably 4 or 5 years at that point, just chasing down that one goal. And my parents had told someone in our small town that I was going to fly fighters, and the person was like, "No, women aren't allowed to fly in combat. You must be mistaken. You must be mistaken what your own daughter uh, is doing." And my dad was just like, "Whatever." Like,
Yeah, what can you say? It's just like, well, okay.
yeah, some people just won't believe you, but I think that's becoming
Yeah,
less common. I
I hope so.
There were a few moments when I was competing in my pilot training class, when people I was competing against, I'm trying to do as well as I can on my flights and my check rides, because that all goes into the
Mhm.
ranking and your chance of getting that fighter aircraft that we were kind of all competing for. Where someone like close in competition with me was like, "Well, I don't even know why I'm trying so hard, because if it comes down to the 2 of us, you're going to get chosen because you're a woman." Like,
Ah,
so that's frustrating because that undermines all the work you put in, right?
right, right.
Um,
It kind of cheapens it,
exactly.
right?
But
Yeah.
luckily, the way all of that works, it really comes down to numbers. So, of course,
Hmm.
there's some subjectivity for each evaluator you would fly with, but the scores that come out of that are just straight up put into an Excel sheet and you're ranked based on those
Right.
numbers. So it's fairly objective there. And I ended up doing better in the end and getting that spot. But that one will stick with me because it was just so blatant for him to say that.
Yeah.
But luckily, I haven't had many experiences that are quite as harsh as that statement was.
Right. I think it probably gives him a little bit of a personal out, because if he doesn't get the spot, that's his reasoning. And sometimes it ends up being like a defense mechanism just to protect themselves to some extent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're competing, and I mean, we all do it. Like outside of the gender stereotypes, I think we're all guilty at some
Sure.
point of being like, well, they only got that because of this, whatever
Right,
it is.
right. So for the layperson, you're competing for different aircraft
Mhm.
types. Can you just kind of give me an overview of why you were vying for the F-16, and kind of what are the nuances that separate these craft?
Yeah, so pilot training itself is about a year long. And then you go from there to learn your specific aircraft. But
Mhm.
everyone starts out in the same pool. You're all equal. You go into academics. which is all just classes and testing and all that kind of stuff. You go into simulators, and then the first half, you're all flying the same type of aircraft. It's a prop airplane. It's fairly easy to fly. It's great to learn in. But then there comes that halfway point where there's kind of the fork in the road, and only usually 5 to 7 students per class, and like I said, my class had 25 people, can
Mhm.
go down what's called the fighter bomber track. And not everyone, to be fair, not everyone wants to do that, right? There's some people that want to fly a cargo airplane or an air refueler, or they might get motion sick, or they don't like pulling G-forces, things like that. So not everyone in your class is wanting that, but usually a good portion is.
Mhm.
Um, to go down that track, you have to be in the top 50% of your class already. So that kind of cuts it the first time. And then they pick those, 5 to 7 people that are going down that path that now will compete against each other. So the pool is much smaller now, for the next 6 months, to be ranked first through seventh or whatever.
Mhm.
And then when your assignments come at the very end of that year, which it's a long, stressful year. I'm sure you can relate to residency, which is much longer, but kind of
Mhm.
similar, long days, very stressful,
Mhm.
always being
Mhm.
evaluated. Um, at that point, you put in your what we call our dream sheet. So you're going to rank all the aircraft that are in the Air Force inventory that they're currently giving spots out for, from first all the way through 20th or whatever. And so you sit down and you think about all the things, the kind of missions the aircraft fly, the bases that they're located at. That is a factor. How often they deploy, how often you're home, like the tempo of operations, all that stuff kind of goes into it. And then you pick from there. And I knew I wanted to fly fighters at that point,
Mhm.
and I went back and forth actually quite a bit which one I wanted to put first. It was actually between the F-16 or the A-10, which are very different from each other. The A-10 is a much slower aircraft. It has this giant gun on the front of it, but they have a really cool mission. They almost primarily do close air support, which is just supporting our troops on the ground, which is
Mhm.
just such a cool, rewarding mission. So that's why I was drawn to that one. But in the end, I kind of went after the F-16 because it gets to do that mission, but it also gets to fight air to air, and it's fast and maneuverable, and it's just super fun to fly.
So this is like your Lamborghini of planes, is that right?
Yeah, so there's some new aircraft that have come out since then that are fancier as far as the sensors and the tactical ability, but the
Mhm.
F-16 is still like the workhorse of
Yeah.
the fighter fleet. It's really multi-role, and it's good at all the things it does.
And as you went through your training and as you kind of ascended in the ranks, what percentage of women were there?
So, not many. In my pilot training class of 25, I was the only one.
Wow.
Um, and I had a couple other friends that were in classes ahead of me or behind me that would have 1 or 2 women in their classes. Um, but yep, I was the only one in my class. So that was the first time that that ever happened in my life. I was just like, this is just me. Um, Even back in ROTC, there are a lot less women than there are men, but there's still a decent, maybe like a third or 40% that are women. So you still have your pretty big group of friends that are all doing this same adventure with you. And then when I went to F-16s, I was lucky enough to have one other female pilot in my class, and I think we had 18 people in our class,
Mhm.
and we're still really good friends. We actually ended up getting the same first assignment out of our F-16 training, and we went off to Japan to our first squadrons together. We showed up about 3 weeks apart, ended up in the same squadron, and there hadn't been any women in that squadron in quite some time. And so then she shows up, and then 3 weeks later, I show up. So it was definitely good to have each other, uh, both being new to the squadron, because that has its own
Mhm.
challenges regardless of gender, but
Mhm.
then to have someone else who was going through the exact same experiences was pretty awesome. So I'm thankful she was there for sure.
And I think that a lot of times when you're in a field and you're in the minority, there aren't a lot of other women. You kind of go through the schooling and the training, and then you get to the job, right? Your career, And sometimes there's a tendency to say, all right, phew, I've made it. But I think, even for myself, being in practice, you kind of get there, and then you realize that being a woman still makes you still very different, and the different people that you interface with still can create kind of challenges that we have to learn how to deal with. And now that you're in the position that you are now, what kind of challenges do you think still come up, and how do you deal with them?
Yeah, so I think it's evolved continuously throughout my career. That was definitely a turning point, going from, being in training to, hey, I'm actually an F-16 pilot. I'm in a combat squadron. Um, but now it's a group of people that are still more experienced than you, looking down at you as the new person that they have to train. And they don't know how you're going to perceive them and how you're going to fit into the dynamic in the squadron. And I mean, fighter squadrons have changed a lot since that point. Even that was kind of a transitional period, like around 2011 2012, where they were kind of making that transition from the Vietnam era mentality, like good old boys club, to
Mm-hmm.
what you see now in the Air Force, which is I mean, they've always been a very professional organization and very good at what they do, but just the dynamic between people has changed a lot. And I came in right at that shift. So it was kind of an interesting time. People walked on eggshells a little bit because
Mm-hmm.
they weren't sure if they could joke around with me, if I was going to get offended or upset. And for me as well, I was finding what I was okay with and what I wasn't.
Yeah.
And like, how do you, like, am I betraying women if I just laugh along with a joke that's kind of inappropriate, even though it doesn't really offend me? Should I be offended because I'm like the one setting the standard for everyone that's going to follow me? And it's just hard to find your personal tolerance and like really be true to yourself where you're going to fall in that spectrum.
And that's a lot to carry on your shoulders, I think, even something as simple and in the moment as just laughing at something because it's just funny, I think that's that having that in the back of your mind is a lot to carry. And I think similarly to you, the OR is kind of this place where a long time it's been this old boys club. Now it's, there's so many more women surgeons in there, but it's a place where when you're operating, there is banter. You're doing obviously something that requires a lot of attention, but there's still banter, and there are jokes. And sometimes it's you got to pick your battles, right? Pick what is truly offensive and what you can let slide and chuckle over and know that it doesn't actually mean any harm. So I think you've had to do the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, it definitely is a responsibility. And I'm much better at this now and even over the last several years. But when I was a new lieutenant to the squadron, that was a lot of time of figuring out like, this is of my first impression to this community I'm going to be part of for such a long time. And there's
Hmm.
quite a few of fighter pilots in general, but you see the same people over and over, and you definitely develop a reputation. And even as you move every 3 years to a new squadron and a new base, people have heard stuff about you, good or bad, and they know what to expect. And so
Yeah.
you're already developing that at that point. And I think being there's only 2% of fighter pilots in the US that are females, in the Air Force at least. So it's very
Hmm.
small. So we're always under a microscope, whether it's intentional or not. And I genuinely do not think that most of my peers have any malintent. Like, they're like my brothers. I love the vast majority of them. It's just something that they do unintentionally.
Right. I think sometimes there's not even an awareness, right? That if something that is said or done may actually be hurtful or may actually be perceived the wrong way. I think that sometimes people don't even know that they're doing it.
No,
So
absolutely.
growing up, you were very athletic and you participated in track and field. You were also a figure skater. Tell me how being in athletics kind of shaped who you are, and how has that played into your training and your career?
Yeah, so I was not as involved in organized athletics as I think I should have been as a kid. I was actually pretty shy at first, and quiet. And um, my dad traveled a ton for work, and my mom is pretty quiet and shy, private person. And being in a small town, it's a fishbowl. Like everyone knows what's going on with everyone. So I think she kind of shied away from that some and didn't want to, be part of the town gossip and all of that. So we kind of, we're not involved in a ton of group sports, which I look back on now and I'm kind of sad because I was like, man, I would have been really good at soccer or hockey. And I kind of figured that stuff out, my ability and really my willingness to just grind and be uncomfortable and physically and mentally, which is
Mhm.
a great trait in athletics for sure. I discovered that kind of late in high school. I was like, dang, I kind of missed the boat on that. Um, Figure skating is interesting because I'm five. You can't tell sitting here. I'm 5'10", so I'm like a giant in the figure skating world. I would never be really great at it. But I started when I was like 6, and so I
Uh-huh.
grew up doing it. And it's one of those sports that it's mostly an individual sport, but takes a ton of focus and a lot of falling down literally and getting back up and doing that
Mhm.
again and kind of facing your fears when you jump. And people still ask me if that's why I can do the rolls in the jet now and not get dizzy, is because I grew up spinning on the ice. So maybe there's a correlation there. But really, I think as I transitioned into adulthood and I started doing more like running and that kind of stuff on my own and went into Air Force ROTC, which forces you to work out to some extent,
Mhm.
I started just getting better and better at it. And I really enjoyed the competition against myself and to beat
Mhm.
my own times and see how far I could push my body. And I ended up being pretty good at it and went on then to run a few marathons and some other
Wow.
races there, and actually podiumed at a race in Japan
That's
of all places.
awesome.
Yeah, I got the only reason my own. I'm going to tell you this because I never would podium at a race in the U.S. But they placed to 5 places instead of just 3.
Oh, well, hey.
So I got to go up in 5th place and
That's
stand on the
awesome.
stage and get a medal. And I was like, again, 2 feet taller than everyone else. And
That's what I was thinking. You're probably quite tall compared to your competition,
they're
right?
like, who's this random American? And the prize, other than a medal, was like a bushel of apples because
That's amazing.
it was awesome. Yeah.
I'm
So
sure they were great apples too.
that was one of my coolest experiences while living in Japan, was to run this random half marathon and then podium and get my apples up on a stage with all
That
my
is
competition being
great.
like 2 feet shorter than me. But I digress. That's a random story.
You know
Uh,
what? We like digressing on this podcast. Those are the best stories, I think.
yeah, but those same traits of just perseverance, kind of mental and physical, definitely translated into going through the training and competing and getting the spot I did in my job. And then once I got into this career field, the military lifestyle is not easy, so
Mhm.
that definitely helps with that. So yeah.
What is your average week like now? What is the day-to-day like for you?
Do you want to know during a normal year or during COVID? Because they're
Right.
so
Well, how
different
about
from each
both?
other.
How about both?
Okay. So normally right now it's what, June? Are we in June? Yeah. See, I don't even know what month it is. Uh, we'd be in the middle of air show season. So
Yeah.
what that looks like for us is almost every single weekend from March to November, we're in a different city putting on shows. So it's like being a band on tour, kind of.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes we'll come home in between. Sometimes we won't, depending how the shows are geographically located relative to Las Vegas, which is where we're based out of.
Mhm.
So usually we would leave for a show on a Thursday. We fly there cross country. Sometimes it's, a quick hop over to California, or sometimes it's, a 4 or 5 hour flight to New York or Florida or something like that. We're air refueling on the way there. We get in there, we do some media interviews, we get settled in. Friday, we fly a full practice over the airfield just to get familiar with what everything looks like. We also make that practice kind of a private show for the Make-A-Wish kids, which is
Oh,
always
very
awesome.
cool.
Yeah, so
Very
they
cool.
get to have their own tent, and it's usually a fairly small group, so they get to watch our show without the crowds and the stress, and they get to have shade and all that, which you don't necessarily get at a normal show. And then when we land,
Mhm.
we go over and we hang out with them for like 30 minutes, get to, sign their booklets. They ask us questions. It's super rewarding. One of the best parts of the job for sure.
That is really cool.
And then usually Friday or Saturday night, we'll have some sort of public relations event that the air show puts on or the city puts on or something like that, which is a lot of meeting different people. And those range from something on the beach to like a white tablecloth steak dinner to something super casual. It's a whole different array of things. And then Saturday and Sunday pretty much look the same. They're both air show days. So
Mm-hmm.
anyone who's actually come to an air show and seen the Thunderbirds at any point, we usually fly at the end of the day. We're the closers, the headliners
Mm-hmm.
of the air show for that. And so we'll get a little bit of free time in the morning, which is nice. We'll usually work out. If our families are in town for the show, we'll hang out with them.
Mm-hmm.
Just nice, relax a little bit. And then we go in, we brief, we fly the show, we sign autographs out on the line, and then we go in and we watch the entire show, maneuver by maneuver, with each person saying anything that was weird or went wrong or they should have done differently or whatever. And then we watch video footage of it. And we're all just sitting there watching you mess up your formation or whatever it is. And then we have a
It's
grade sheet. We
it's
take
the
that to
it's the post game video analysis, right? Just like
It
in,
is.
in sports.
It's where you make your money really on getting better. It's not necessarily airborne.
Yeah.
It's what you see afterwards that you can really internalize and then take with you to the next flight to improve yourself. And then we fly home on Monday.
Yeah. And then how do you spend your downtime?
Well, there's not very much of it during show season, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Monday is usually a fairly long day because we'll fly cross country and have some office stuff to do when we land back here. And then Tuesday is actually still a full work day for us. We'll fly
Oh, wow.
a local practice. Sometimes we'll fly
Mm-hmm.
twice, two local
Mm-hmm.
practices. And Wednesday is kind of our one day weekend Wednesdays, uh,
Yeah.
which is also known as laundry day.
Right.
To repack to leave again Thursday.
And so things definitely changed with the COVID time and the cancellation of the air shows. And I know that, and I want to hear your description of what your routine is like. But I know that you also participated in a lot of the hospital flyovers. We had that here in Portland with the Oregon Air National Guard, and I took my little son to be on top of the roof at our hospital and check that out. And I remember reading about your squadron doing that too, and I was like, oh man, I wish I could see Michelle fly over me. But I was definitely grateful for the Air National Guard here. But so that had to have been one of the things that you did during this time. And how else has life just kind of been different, life and work been different for you?
Yeah, it's been the polar opposite of what it normally is, which has been nice in some aspects, but we definitely obviously would prefer to not have a pandemic going on.
Sure.
But we were literally our very first show of the 2020 show season. We were packed. Our C-17, which is like our big cargo airplane that carries all of the rest of our team and our bags and everything, was loaded. And our advanced pilot, who flies an F-16 to the show site the day before, was already gone. He was already there, which is
Oh,
supposed to
wow.
be in Texas, was the first one. He had already left and was there. And we got to work that morning, and they're like, we're going to delay our brief 2 hours. We're trying to figure out like what this show, if the show's going to cancel, what's happening. And then it was like, we're going to delay 24 hours. And then
Oh,
during that 24-hour period, it was like, the show's canceled. And then we're like, okay. And then
yeah.
within that week, it was like Air Force stop movement through the end of, I don't even remember through the end of April, which rapidly was moved to the end of May, which
It
moved
was
into
like
June.
dominoes falling almost, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh, I think you're frozen.
Uh-oh.
Ooh.
How's that?
Okay, you're back.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah, our sound was okay, so I caught everything here. So I think I got everything there.
Okay,
So,
good. I didn't know
but
if
yeah,
you could.
no,
Yeah,
it
and
was good.
then it went from leaving for our first show, which is kind of a very exciting time of the year, like trained all winter, and
Yeah,
here we go. And then it was like, okay, it's not happening, and now you're going to quarantine at home. We're going to telework, which doesn't really mean very much when you fly for a living.
right. So
And we're going to do that for 2 weeks.
what is the teleworking?
I mean, a lot of it was just having access to email and checking in
Yeah.
with each other and figuring out what was happening to our schedule as it rapidly evolved and how the squadron, like how much time before we could come back to work, because our skills are pretty perishable. Like we
Hmm.
have to practice several times a week to maintain the proficiency that we need to fly the shows. But yeah, we took a complete knee for 2 weeks, uh, which was a long time. Was really nice to hang out with our families.
Mm-hmm.
I got married a little over a year ago, so I hadn't had that time with my husband and my stepson, who's 7, ever. And
Yeah.
so it was pretty awesome at first until you realize how serious everything was.
Right.
And then you're like, okay, this is not so awesome, and we're going stir crazy. But then we were rapidly homeschooling. So
Yeah.
almost everyone on the team, at least most of the pilots, have kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so they're all trying to homeschool their kids, and some of our spouses are working from home. And yeah, so we're just like everyone else,
Yeah.
chaotic times, trying to make it work.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think like as parents too, it's we can be in the we can be in these high achieving careers and then all of a sudden you're asked to homeschool and
Oh,
you realize how hard it is. I mean, there are tears on both sides, at least for us, from time to time. So that's why I say our teachers really all deserve so much recognition and big raises. My goodness.
absolutely. I think I posted something on my Instagram. I was like, all teachers should be making $1 million a year. I didn't realize that a 7-year-old's attention span is about 4 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's very frustrating to me.
Yeah.
Come on.
It's definitely a skill that many of us do not have. So,
No.
well, I really appreciate having you on and now that you're kind of getting back into somewhat of a more normal schedule, taking the time to talk to me, I want to make sure that you're able to pass on some of your wisdom that you've gained over the years and if you had one good piece of advice for our listeners, maybe some of the women who are listening who want to pursue a career like yours, become a fighter pilot, or even just a woman who wants to go into a male dominated field, what's your one piece of advice?
Yeah, it's hard to narrow it down to one for sure, because I could just go on a diatribe about this forever. But I think, right, you want to be taken seriously, you want to be viewed as an equal, and you have to start that with putting in the work to be good at your job to build that credibility. That's like the foundation of the pyramid. So you have to, this sounds cliche, work hard, don't do drugs, stay in school. Uh, but you really have to know your skill and show them that you can do that job just as well as they can. And from there, you will make those relationships. You will gain those people that are advocating for you. You'll gain those allies, and that will help you, progress from there. But I feel like without that foundation, it's very difficult to kind of work your way through the nuances that go beyond that.
That's really good advice. So, if the listeners want to keep up with you, you mentioned you are on Instagram. What's your handle there?
It's Mace, which is my call sign, MACE, Mace T-Bird 5.
That's awesome. That's not like my handle is not nearly as cool as that. That's definitely like
So
that's
much thought
definitely
goes into choosing your Instagram.
right, exactly. And is there anywhere else where they can keep up with you when you guys start flying and doing shows again? Tell us where our listeners can find you online.
Yeah, absolutely. So AF Thunderbirds has an Instagram as well, and they post tons of cool stuff from all sides of the team, the maintenance side, the flying side, of course. They keep us up to date on shows. Airforce Thunderbirds, or afthunderbirds.com, has our show schedule. So we travel all over the country. Like I said, this season will be a little bit truncated, but next season we'll be back at it. So come see us in person. And then the Thunderbirds also have a Facebook account that they're super active on.
Awesome. I appreciate your time. It's been really fun to talk to you today. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Absolutely. It's been a blast.
Thank you. All right. That's a wrap.
Okay. That was fun.
Yeah.
I'm always
That
nervous
was
for
super
podcasts
fun.
because you never
Oh,
know where they're
really?
going to go.
Yeah, I know. It's not particularly scripted, but as you can see, I'm kind of conversational. I just like hearing about what you do and I know the listeners will too. And we launch in less than 2 weeks.
Okay.
So it's not even out there yet, but I'm like doing the last minute scrambling and I had all this time on my hands when COVID happened because elective cases kind of all went away, and so I was able to kind of get a lot done and finally get this out. And so now that I'm operating again, I'm like, oh, I got to do the last minute things and get everything together and get the podcast going. So it's
For
exciting.
sure. I'm excited to hear it. And I'm excited to listen to the other guests that you have interviewed as well. So that'll
Yeah,
be
got some cool people on. I'm very very blessed and grateful for everyone, including you, who have agreed to do this. So it's been a good
That's
experience.
awesome. And speaking of Portland, that's funny. We actually were planning to do a flyover of Portland. Uh,
Oh, really?
I was the person planning it, so I had all the hospitals
Yeah.
picked out, the whole route, and then we basically were given directive by higher headquarters Air Force that we couldn't double tap cities. So if a local unit
Oh,
was going to do a
yeah.
flyover, just
Yeah.
for because I mean we're expensive, like
Sure.
it's a lot
Yeah.
of resources to take us all the way up there.
Right,
So
right.
they're like, we can't, we don't want any fraud, waste, and abuse questions. Like we can't be double tapping cities with multiple jet flyovers. So we
Yeah.
actually had it all planned, and then we found out that the Portland Air National Guard, which I've flown with that squadron, they're super cool, and the Eagles are cool, but we would we would have been up there otherwise. So that's
It's kind
kind
of
of
like stepping on toes, right? No one wants to step on toes.
exactly. And we're like, but
Yeah,
this is
just
what
the
we
optics
do.
are
We're
duplicating
really
it.
good at it, and there's six of us, so
Oh,
but
yeah.
at least you guys got something.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was great. It was really cool. Well, thank you so much again. I'll record my intro of you. If you think of anything you want me to add in there, I'm happy to do it. But I will just keep you posted, and in the next couple of days I'll send you a link to some of the social share stuff for just the podcast launching.
Okay.
And then once I know your date, then I'll give you a heads up about that, and then we'll make a little social share, pictures with your bio and your headshot, and I'll share those with you as well.
Perfect. That sounds great. Looking forward to it.
All right. Stay
Thank you.
safe, and thank you so much, and I will be in touch.
Thanks. Have a good one.
All right, you too. Bye.